Hello and welcome here on startup.ro. My name is Vlad Andriescu, and today I have the pleasure of talking with a Romanian founder who is basically now a serial entrepreneur in the US, Flaviu Simihăian. He co-founded Amplicare and made an exit, and now he is the founder of Troy.AI, a health tech business in the US, but I'm going to let him tell you more about it. Flaviu, a pleasure to have you here.
Good to be here, Vlad. Thanks for having me.
A pleasure always. And I just want to start from the very beginnings, before jumping into what Troy does. Tell us more about you, because I remember that the first time I encountered your name, it was almost 10 years ago, I think, when you started your first startup. I know that you were born in Romania, studied in the US, and then continued to an entrepreneurship career there. How did it go?
Yeah, look, I have my other startup here in the background, my 2-year-old daughter. So, look, I came to the US when I was 14 years old to play tennis, and I was very fortunate to have a generous family in North Carolina that enabled me to stay with them, which, by the way, just wanted to pause in terms of culture. It was a big culture for me that this family that wasn't related to me would host me and help me out for nothing, really. I was taught in Romania this mentality of, like, if somebody gives you something, they want something in return, right? I don't know if you guys also have share the same mentality. Like, you get nothing for free. Like, at some point, somebody's gonna ask you for something back, and that's how I was raised. And this family of Americans, they had this genuine generosity where they, again, helped me. They kind of became like my second pair of parents. I saw them last week, and they want nothing in return. And I think that from the start kind of changed my mindset. Like, wait a second, like, what's happening here? For the startup and technology, I'd say it's in the blood, right? We're Romanians, hackers at heart. I feel like I have to figure it out from when I was growing up, internet cafes, and so building a computer. Always had interest in technology. And when I moved to North Carolina when I was 14 with his family, I programmed MIRC. If you guys remember Merck, I was IRC client, and I programmed this trivia bot in the Teckle scripting language that Merck used. And I mean, my girlfriend at the time, my wife doesn't hear, I made her this website, and she was an aspiring pop star in Romania. So I'd stay up all night doing this stuff on the tech side, and then going to school in the US during the daytime, getting no sleep. So that's was always in the blood.
It's nice that you mentioned that bot script, because I think I spent almost 3 or 4 years playing trivia on Mirk, as we called it, and it was something that kind of changed me, playing there and meeting with people online. But I wanted to come back to the moment you came to the US playing tennis. What happened with the tennis career?
Oh, I kept playing tennis. So I played tennis in Romania since I was 5, and then I played in the US in high school. Then I played in college at Davidson College in North Carolina, where we had our best year when I was captain, although it was also the year that Steph Curry was there, which you might remember is like an NBA MVP. So he overshadowed our successful tennis career and year. Nevertheless, I also tried playing professional tennis for a year to give it a go. But sorry to disappoint you, I'm not the next Ilya Nastasia that people thought I might be. But I kept in touch. And I'd say tennis, somebody just asked me yesterday how tennis affected startups. And I always thought they're very separate. But I suppose it is a bit a way of teaching you that grit, right? I lost a lot more tennis matches than I won. So it's an individual sport, or you constantly have to pick yourself back up and try again. So I do think sport more and more, I start seeing the connection between sport and entrepreneurship.
And I know that you, even if you had an interest in technology, you didn't jump to starting a startup at first after going to university. How did you end up basically thinking about starting your own company?
Yeah, I graduated college in 2008 with an economics degree, and that wasn't the best time to have an economics degree and be looking for a job. And fortunately, my old high school principal called me up to help. He always knew I was into technology. I remember in his history class, I got in trouble for reading a PHP book while he was teaching history, U.S. history. So he always knew I had this passion. So he, as principal, his computer science teacher had left in the middle of the year. And so he called me to see if I could help teach high school computer science. And that was my first job that I was able to get during this recession. And then from that, I got another job at the local university in technology. And I automated my job. Honestly, I didn't really need a human being for that job. So it had gotten to the point where it wasn't even necessary. And I always wanted to start a business. So I kept having ideas, but wouldn't move on them. And I do think this, at least for me, was important, is to they call it burn the boats, to really jump in without a parachute, so to speak. And so I quit my job without really a plan. I knew I wanted to start a company, but I didn't have any a very clear plan. I just put myself in a situation where I had to figure it out. And I thought it would take 3 months, but it took 2 years.
Yeah, but I wanted to ask you, because you went first to the US when you were 14. So we're now talking about you went to high school, then to university there. Did you ever think, how did you change during this time? Because I don't know, a kid from Romania, 14 years old, roughly around the 2000, who were you after this experience when leaving university, getting your first job there, comparing it to who are you when you left Romania?
That's a good point. Well, I'm still figuring out who I am. But I'd say the biggest thing coming to the US is I was really funny in Romania. It's kind of like I like to think like a popular kid in my class, tennis player. It was all kind of, I guess, peak. I was just very funny. And in the US, all the jokes from Romania did not translate. So I became like very weird, Romanian kid, which was like a kind of a shock, because I was like, guys, I am really funny. You guys just don't understand it. So it took me, probably took me 5 or 6 years, probably in college, late college, where I finally got my stride and confidence to be able to be funny in English and interact in social circles comfortably. So it was definitely like a painful, difficult transition. That's probably the biggest thing. The other thing is I turned from a tennis player into more of a, I had never read a book fully. In Romania, playing tennis and sports don't usually mesh with reading. And I had a couple of really good teachers in high school and in college that I started getting much more interested in learning and reading. And I went to some very good schools like Davidson College. So I think I was all of a sudden was like, wait a second, there's more to life than tennis. And so I got, and hacking, programming stuff. So I think to this day, I still have like the audiobook I'm listening now. It's about literary and philosophy and stuff like that. So it opened up this part that I never even knew existed before I came.
So you mentioned that you wanted to start something. You thought that it would take you 2 months, but it took you 2 years. So you started Amplicare, which was a SaaS platform that helped seniors afford their prescription medication, which is a very complicated thing in itself, moreover in the US. So how did it start, and how did you tackle health tech and pharma businesses?
Yeah, I think the big lesson here is, I think the people, the co-founders of a business are more important than the idea itself. In my case, I started learning Python, which is a programming language. And then I organized the Python meetup back when there were meetups in where I was living at the time in North Carolina. And there were very few people at the time in 2010, 11 at Python meetups in Charlotte, North Carolina. And so when I organized it there, we had to change locations because one location was locked. So we went to this coffee shop and show up at the coffee shop thinking nobody would ever come to a Python meetup. They got moved locations that nobody's even going to. But sure enough, there was a guy that comes up and is like, "Hey, is this the Python meetup?" I'm like, "What? Who are you?" And this guy, Matt, was a pharmacist. He was in pharmacy school and learning Python on the side. He had built this Python project. And so he was trying to show me like, "Hey, look, I built this. I need help with this thing." And just kind of blew my mind to meet, I think it was the first pharmacist I had ever met, but also there was a Python programmer on the side and wanting to start businesses and things. So I immediately was like, wow, this is a very interesting person. And I started to share the things I learned about Python with him, but also to learn a lot about pharmacy and healthcare from that side. And the more we hung out and got together, he wanted to start something. I was right in that period of wanting to start something. And so we said, hey, why don't we start something in the pharmacy space since you know it? And that's when, like anything, we had an original idea, which wasn't what we built. We wanted to build a whole pharmacy management system with all these features. But then when we started talking to actual pharmacy owners, people who practice every day, we came across this other problem, which was, hey, I have a lot of seniors that ask me, why are my drugs so expensive every month? Medicare costs so much. It changes over time. It's so confusing. And so I think the best thing we did was listen, like, hey, that seems interesting. I see this pattern that you have this problem. Let's see if we can fix that. And our idea was, hey, let's make that a little easier and streamline, and then we'll do all the other stuff, thinking it would just be a first feature. But in fact, it turned out to be the whole product and consume the next 7 years of our life.
But how complicated was to gather the clients in this market? Because of course you started with talking with pharmacy owners. You discovered that fit, that product market fit that everyone is looking for, but to develop further.
Yeah, and I want to score one under point is this, because this sounds risky starting a company, and I want to say that I also said, hey, why don't we make this an iPad app? Because I wanted to learn iOS development. And if the idea failed, I still had learned something. And I think founders take a lot of risks, or people think founders like risk, but I'd say we're pretty risk averse, constantly thinking of ways to de-risk an idea and hedge our bets, like with this iOS development. And I'd say also the other thing is, you think there's a complicated niche you're working, this complicated niche thing. I'd say, even right now, actually, my best investment is an angel investment in a piece of healthcare called 340B. Very, very niche part of healthcare most people don't know about. And it's because I think that's where the true problems and opportunities lie, right? If once you get to know an industry and a problem deeply, you find out a very specific thing to fix. It's rare that you start with a high level idea that solves everything, right? Even Facebook started with just one university, right? College campus photo sharing app, and it grew over time. So I think it's very important to solve a problem that people actually have, but it sounds simple, but it requires a lot of very deep listening, and honestly kind of changing your mind, right? We thought we were going to build one thing, but we ended up building something else. And then to get to your question about sales, okay, how do we get our first customers? Well, we had gone to a couple conferences and got 10 customers, mostly just, well, I drove to the first one, and through a friend of the folks actually that I was staying with in North Carolina, my second pair of parents, this guy saw us, and I think I told him the price for the software was $1,048, because we had done this calculation that was like the ROI necessary. And the guy was like, okay, well, how about if I pay you half? And so we're like, okay. And so that was our first customer. I think it was mostly just trying to be nice to us. He saw us as like himself when he was young. And but once we got those first 10 customers through conference and people's pity, then we got zero for the next 6 months. And we signed up to get into an accelerator in New York. So I moved to New York, and we kept trying different ideas, different markets, going after bigger customers, bigger pharmacies, selling the data. We just had all these ideas like, oh, where do we go from here? And it was a very confusing time, right? Everybody in the accelerator was raising millions of dollars, and it was a lot. It was like a business school in a matter of 3 months. And I think the most important thing is the founder of the accelerator sat me down one day and said, look, because I was struggling what idea to pursue, what to do. And so he said, well, look, what have you actually sold so far? And it was the 10 customers that paid us a little money. And so he's like, okay, well, how many of those are there? Oh, there's tens of thousands. Okay, well, get more of those. Do that again. And I think it's what clicked for me. I always thought, I was a technology guy. I thought I wasn't good at sales, right? A lot of engineers hate sales. And I think it took for me to say, okay, that's just a belief. That's just a limiting belief I have. And so if I decide I am good at sales and I would get good at sales, then I could do it. And I had to learn it, figure it out. And so I think that helped us actually get more customers.
Was it hard to stick with the product that you saw working, that feature that became the product, and not get caught in let's develop more, let's develop something different, let's develop something sexier, and stick to that plan?
Absolutely. It was so tempting to do other things, especially when you're engineers, right? He could program, I could program, so we could build anything. So we saw another problem. Hey, let's fix that. So it was very hard to not pursue those things. At the same time, by the way, again, being an accelerator, being only 2 people, we do have those 10 customers would occasionally call us wanting stuff. And then we also had to raise money because we were running out of funds. My co-founder had gone into debt on credit cards. I was out of savings. So the other question I had to the accelerator people were, hey, what should I focus on, right? Should I build a product for these 10 people to be better, build other things? Or if I focus on sales, I can't do any of that. So those 10 people might leave, right? And then we don't have that either. And so I was really struggling how to divide my time, right? Is it sales, product, tech, hiring people, going to conferences? What should I focus on? And I was hoping like they would give me the answer. And I still remember the guy was like, look, you have to do it all. Like all those things you said, you got to do all of them all the time, every day, nonstop. And in a weird way, it was like a satisfying answer to know that that's what it takes, right? It's not that I hadn't figured out the formula of how to split my time. It's just that that's how it is.
And you spent 7 years building this company, raising money, then going for an exit. How did this come?
Yeah, people in the industry approached us a few times. We didn't think it was a fit. I'd say I'd already started working on Troy, so I wanted to build, and we'll talk about that, a bigger insurance company. And so I had already put in my co-founder initially as CEO, and I had still involved at the board level, but focusing more on Troy. My co-founder in Amplicare, didn't think starting a Troy was like what he wanted to do, which I totally understand. And so I was already, I guess, outside the business a bit, and which helped me, I think, see more clearly from the outside to analyze the business for what it is, right? If so, when an acquisition offer would come, to be able to tell, okay, well, how do I analyze that versus the business's growth potential, the profit it's generating. And so we both decided, well, it would be an acceptable number. And when we got close to it, although we never got fully the number we wanted, we eventually, after a gruesome process, said yes.
And what was the level at which Amplicare was at that moment in number of clients? How big it was?
I think, yeah, we were probably close to 6 million in annual recurring revenue. And that's probably about 5,000 customers. Our customers were small pharmacies, not big chains of pharmacies, but mostly individual pharmacies as customers.
And I know that for a lot of founders, exits are complicated because, as you mentioned, you have to find the right fit, you have to find the right numbers. You leave, you stay, you leave, you let a team there, you grew. What lessons do you have from that exit?
A couple of things. I think one thing I did well was having the next thing already in progress. I talked to a lot of founders that have had exits where they're in a limbo, confused state for many years, trying to figure out. Then they started to try to build the same thing again or another company again to get back to that high. It's almost like a drug that was that startup experience. So I think one thing I did well was I already had the next thing I wanted to do lined up, which I think was really important for my mental health to do. The other lesson is to take a deal, even if it's not good enough. I think I've talked to founders that want to wait for some unrealistic exit, some big number they had in mind. But I think it's hard for them to settle for less. I think each company has a lifespan, just like humans, and eventually it ends. It begins, there's a middle and there's an end.
Yeah.
And so I think we should embrace that life and not force a later stage company to go back to being a high growth early stage company. It really fights that current and natural lifespan, which leads to a lot of misery. So those would be, I think, the two key lessons.
And that thing that you had lined up was Troy Medicare, and tell us more about it, because it's your current endeavor that you are developing.
Yeah, it's interesting. Amplicare was mostly bootstrapped. We had raised $190,000 from angel investors, friends and family, but that's it. Whereas for Troy, or I've always wanted to, or I'm sure you guys read Startup Hydro or TechCrunch and say, oh gosh, these people raised $100 million. And so I had a dream of being a venture-backed startup to also to tackle a bigger problem in healthcare. And we saw that the root of how the money flows in healthcare kind of comes back to the insurance companies or the government. And there was only a few insurance companies. So we had this crazy idea, well, what if we take on the largest insurance companies and build a better product, leverage technology to streamline operations and make it more user-friendly, cheaper for the seniors in this case. We would still tackle seniors, people over the age of 65 in the US. And use that pharmacy network I'd built before at Amplicare as a distribution channel for the health insurance company. So that is Troy Medicare, and it did require venture funding. And so, yeah, we went for it.
Why did you wanted to build a VC-backed startup? What it would bring differently you thought back then to you, to the challenge, to the perspectives, the opportunities for that company?
Part of it is just a naivete, thinking the grass is always greener on the other side. You also, I think as founders, we see dollars raised be equal with success, right? So, hey, they raised $50 million. They must be successful. And I think it's the kind of lesson you only learn by doing it, because so you just had to challenge. I also think some businesses require cash. So for example, Troy, the health insurance company, truly does need what's called risk-based capital as an insurance company that is tens of millions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars, that without which you cannot even enter in a regulated market. So I do think some just need it, whereas Amplicare didn't need it. Software as a service has a very high margin in it. So if we're able to close sales like we did, annual contracts paid up front, it could fund the business in a way that it doesn't require outside investment. So I do think each type of business might or might not require that venture funding, but part of it was just naivete.
And where are you now with Troy?
Yeah, Troy, let's see, we've raised around $30 million. We are over 50 million in revenue. However, we're only in North Carolina, just to give you the idea of how big this market is, right? We're only a sliver of a market in one of the 50 states in the United States. So it is a huge market. It does have very huge competitors, which make it hard to compete against. These companies are definitely very savvy. So I think we've launched it. We've grown our geographical footprint again this year. So it's continuing to grow, not as fast as I had hoped, but it's still growing. And we also launched a technology. I mentioned using technology to make our health insurance more streamlined, better, which we do today, and we call that technology Troy.AI. And more recently, we said, "Oh gosh, what if we also serve other health insurance companies with that technology? So instead of just keeping it for ourselves for the sliver of a population in North Carolina, what if we offer it to all health insurance companies all over the country?" And so that's, I'd say, my main focus now is scaling the technology side. We hired a CEO that's running the health insurance company, and I'm focused on selling the technology platform. We hired a team in Romania, and so I'm scaling that to. We're in the talks with one of the largest health insurance in the country, companies in the country. So fingers crossed that we'll be able to roll, because at the end of the day, we want to make an impact on real patients. And so Troy Medicare has a few thousand patients, but there are 50 million plus patients in the country. So we think this is a way to impact more people faster.
Seeing or understanding the medical business, the insurance business in the US from a European perspective, it's complicated. It's, few people understand the system just seeing it from here. So how complicated was to tackle this market? Because you said that with Troy Medicare, you are just in North Carolina, and it's already a big market. But how complicated it was to navigate this market, which has these huge players that kind of control the system?
Yeah, it is. It is. Healthcare in the US is a $4 trillion industry. So it is gigantic. I'd say the important thing is really listening to the details of and having a passion for learning those details. It is a steep learning curve, but while that is a barrier to entry for a newcomer, it's also a competitive moat once you're in, right? And so, for example, for us, it took us a huge amount of time, effort, and work and capital to get to that sliver of the market. But now it's a bit of a moat, whereas if Vlad wanted to start a competitor tomorrow, it would be very challenging for you to do it again, and it would take some time. So I think that's actually good, right? The more complicated, that's, I think, a big advantage for startups, because we can adapt faster than a big company. So if you look at a complicated industry that changes a lot of regulations is always shifting. I think that's actually a huge opportunity for startups, which can navigate those faster than a large company. And look, the other thing about it is I've always wanted to build something that matters or that has an impact. I guess I couldn't convince myself that building a photo app, at the time photo apps were really popular. I guess now not as much, but even now building a crypto, NFT, and I just could never get excited about that because I couldn't tie it in my head to an impact. I still remember we did this whole exercise trying to trace back in this. I'm in a bunch of groups like EO or YPO that we have retreats where we try to dig into these issues. And one of the things I realized is I remember when I was at a tennis tournament in Bucharest when I was like 11 years old. My parents had sent me there by myself as usual, and I would just go to the tennis tournament, go back home, make some food, whatever. And I was in Piazza Romana going to buy myself a strudel, and there was this old lady that looked a lot like my grandmother. She could tell she had a really hard life, and she was just kind of there begging for money, and it just broke my heart. And I remember I gave her all my money and just went home, and it just made a huge impact to me that you have people that have lived 80 years on this planet and they have nothing and no one to help them. And I think to this day that really affects me. And so I think doing something to make those people's lives just a little bit easier, I could really get passionate about that.
Going to technology and the way you are using now in Troy.AI technology to change this industry you are in it with. How does the technology work? What does it do?
Yeah, I'd say it's empowering the humans. I don't want to overstate the impact of technology by itself, because especially in healthcare, I do believe you don't just want a technology. It's really important to have that human connection. One of the biggest issues with seniors is loneliness and the lack of connection. And so what I learned through my last company is seniors have a very deep connection with their pharmacist because they see them very often. They're in the neighborhood, they're friends. They see them much more often than they see their doctor or sometimes even their family. So it's a very close connection. So they already have that human connection element. So our job with the technology is really to empower those clinicians, the pharmacists, with the knowledge so they can do even better. So for example, when a senior gets home from a hospital, we are the only company that notifies the pharmacist and say, hey, Mrs. Jones, you know her, she comes to your pharmacy every week. Well, she was in the hospital, she just got out, she needs some help. Go over there or send somebody over there to deliver her medication, see what's going on, see if she needs anything else, right? So that's one example. The other things we do, blood glucose measurements or blood pressure management, again, by the pharmacy. Our job is to let them know, hey, this person has high blood sugar. Hey, this person, here's their most recent lab results of their blood. Pharmacy usually doesn't have any visibility into that. Yeah. But now we tell them, hey, this is the person that has high blood sugar from their latest lab results. Let's manage their glucose. Let's check in on them every time you see them. And in exchange, we'll pay you, we'll recognize you as a pharmacist and pay you $30, $50 each time you do this, because obviously the value to a health insurance company is great if Mrs. Jones doesn't end up in the hospital. Hospitalizations in the US cost $10,000, $20,000 each time, right? So if I can save a $20,000 bill, I'm happy paying the pharmacy $30, $50, $50 to make sure Mrs. Jones does not end up in the hospital. So our job, again, is to take that data and empower that pharmacist, but at the end of the day, it's on them as a human to make that connection with the senior.
Yeah, this is amazing because you, as you mentioned, you help the patients, not becoming the patient in the hospital, and also, as you mentioned, empowering pharmacists, which we sometimes think just as sellers of products, but they are not. They can be a real connection and a prevention for these people that need them. But going a bit forward with our conversation, you mentioned that you hired some people from some programmers from Romania to develop this technology, and I know that also in Amplicare you did this. Besides the cost, which is a difference, what was the motivation of finding IT people in Romania to work at your companies?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's the cost. It's we hire Romanians not because they're cheaper, but because they're better. And so that's why we went with that, not just for software engineering, but even product and design. So our designer currently, it's actually the same person. We worked with Medicare too, and he's Romanian, and then our head of product is Romanian. So we simply believe there's actually a tremendous amount of skill, and we've seen that happen more and more over the years, where Romanian engineers did not want to work at outsourcing companies anymore. And so they want to start their own company, which is one option, or they could join a company that's outside. I see this all the time where engineers work for startups in Canada and the US directly as a small team. And I think it works really, really well. I think I've also learned to hire, I think I used to hire very junior people. One of the things I've now learned is I tend to hire much more senior people. So our team is smaller than it used before, but much more senior. And that's led to such a pleasant working environment. There's like less drama. These folks know what they're doing. They don't need constant, management. They don't want that. They're happy working and doing their thing. And if there's an issue, raising it. It's just a much more pleasant working environment. So yeah. I enjoy working with Romanian engineers quite a lot more than US-based engineers.
And starting two companies there in the US, living there for some years now. If you were to describe the European founder versus the American founder, what are the differences between them?
Yeah, I guess let me think. I think Europeans, particularly Romanians, tend to have this national inferiority complex. This might sound controversial, but maybe it's not relevant. But yeah. I remember for me, at least growing up, and sometimes when I talk to folks there, they tend to think like West is better, right? That like Germany is better than Romania, and then US is better than Germany. They love kind of listing things in what's better. And I just think that's a very self-fulfilling prophecy, right? The more you say it, the more true it becomes. And I think you have founders that start businesses with the plan of expanding to the US someday. So I think that's a mistake. I think either you start a business there, like actually I invested in one of the folks I worked with at Medicare. They started a company called Lunette Eyewear, which is eyeglasses company in Romania. They have several stores in Romania, and they're profitable, and that's great. That's their market is Romania. They might expand to Hungary, Bulgaria, but that's their market, and it works, and it's profitable. Or the alternative, you could start with the customer being in the US from the start. So you're building a product, but you're going to sell into the US. But trying to do both, I think, is impossible. I think you got to focus on one or the other, and immerse yourself in it, not trying to do a little bit of both. Like I see folks, we'll sell this to companies in Romania, and then a year or two down the line we'll expand to the US. That transition almost never works.
Yeah, I mean, one of the talking points here at startup conferences between founders and investors, it's the way of thinking globally, because sometimes, for example, Romania is a big enough country to have a market for business like you mentioned, which sells eyeglasses, but a small market if you think of startups. And it's complicated to expand. Sometimes you go one country further, not just going directly to the US or to the UK if that's your market.
Yeah, I agree. On the other hand, look, I think the market size is a bit of an issue. I've had this problem in the past, and actually just talked to a company in Romania that's raising money and told me that their addressable market is $50 million. If they sell the product to X thousand of customers, that's $50 million. But that's not enough to be a venture-backed, investor-backed company.
But where is the sweet spot? Because I see sometimes in pitches this total addressable market, which seems amazingly big, maybe too big. Let's describe it as the word versus what you said, $50 million total addressable market, which is just too small. Where's the sweet spot in this?
Well, there's two ways to calculate your market. And I'd say this is the biggest issue we've made early on at Medicare, and I had to learn, because I also thought it was our market was fine, but in the end it turned out to be small. So now I know. There's two ways to calculate it. There's either top down, right? When you, like you said, you look at, well, what's the total automobile market in the world, and right, how many Teslas and Fords and Dacias are sold. So like a huge market. And then, okay, we're going to sell technology to auto manufacturers. So we're only, 0.01% of that. Or we're Uber, we're going to take, X percent of the automobile market. That's one way. I think a better way usually is to go bottom up, where you say, okay, well, we sell, schnitzels for $10 a schnitzel, and there's 100 million people eating schnitzels, so 10 times 100 is $1 billion of schnitzel market. So I think that's a better way to do it and be more realistic about what it could be. And we're doing it that way. It's a little fine to be, okay, well, the people who don't eat schnitzels today and they eat maybe hamburgers, well, we can include them too, because they might eat schnitzels tomorrow too. So I think as long as you don't go too far, and it still makes sense, I think it's a better way to do a total market assessment. Mm-hmm. In terms of the sweet spot, I guess, look, the sweet spot, if you're not raising outside capital, is any market. It doesn't matter, I think, right? Like the person who opens a coffee shop on the corner, they don't think about market size, right? You're aiming for profitability, which is I don't want to put that down. I think actually that's a really good thing, especially in this market. It's the best thing. That's what everybody's looking for. So I wouldn't worry at all about market size. It's garbage. It doesn't matter unless you're coming. But when you're coming to a pitch asking investors like, hey, we're asking for $500K at a $5 million valuation. I think some people do that, and I did that just because that's what you do. And, you read about it on the news, but that's bad, right? You really don't want to show up. When you start asking for that investment, what you're not realizing is you're putting yourself in a totally different type of track that now you have to grow, you have to have a big market. And if you don't hit that, you might end up losing your company and getting nothing. So the economics change drastically. And people don't realize that. I think people just go, I'll just raise some money, see how it goes. But I think we should make a conscious decision. Like, okay, if we're going to go for profitability, we shouldn't raise outside capital at these crazy valuations. And that's totally fine. Like I said, many companies have done that. But if you're going to go ask money, then I do think you have to justify at least a $1 to $2 billion market size, probably these days even 10 billion or more, to really get venture capital interested in your company.
You worked with Romanian developers, product people. You mentioned also some investments you made. Why maybe did you maintain contact with the Romanian ecosystem, and what is your impression about its evolution, seeing it from afar but somehow very close?
Yeah, it's grown up so much you can't even keep up with it, right? I mean, you guys, I'm a part of Tech Angels and Transylvania Angels Network, and it's so exciting to see because I think the quality of founders has gone up tremendously. Or do you have founders better than I was when I started my company? And I think the talent is there, the product capability, right? We can build amazing product. There's the UiPath mafia and folks that and other startups that have exited. I mean, even Medicare has like a little mafia of like a couple of people that were fortunate were able to get some cash when we exited. So I think all that goes back into a system that creates even better founders. So I think that's really gotten better. I think it's also a bit more disconnected, and at least maybe it's just me, but it feels much more disconnected than, say, in New York. There's a lot more, I guess, hubs and sharing and events where maybe I'm not plugged into Romania as much, but it doesn't feel quite as connected with each other. People are kind of working on stuff on their own. Maybe that is a Romanian thing, and that we all kind of try to prove ourselves without the help of others. And I'm like that too, but I think I'm always more successful when I do ask the help from others. So it's the nature of humans, perhaps. But look, I love being connected. We're actually hosting a hackathon in Cluj at Wolfpack Digital. Shout out to them. On December 19th, we're gonna have a hackathon where people share what they're working on. I share some of these lessons and what we're working on, and really, it's a great way to learn for me from the next generation of these entrepreneurs that are super smart. And a lot of them, I noticed, they don't want to work for. It's changed quite a bit, especially with AI. I feel like they don't feel the need to build a big team, right? They don't feel the need to even get a job, part of the creator economy. So I do think it's changing quite a bit. I hope that translates into more startups with more individual founders.
Yeah, indeed. But talking about founders, you have a podcast called Founder Secrets, and I wanted you to ask to give us, let's say, 3 founder secrets. What would those be from your experience, from meeting with others, from building 2 companies?
Yeah, I love the podcast. It's a real non-financial venture, just me and my friend who's also a founder, and getting to meet other interesting people. In fact, we should have you on. The lessons, there's so many. I encourage you guys to listen to, and we try to cover all kinds of industries, venture backed, not venture backed, small, big, nonprofits, all over. But I'd say number one is the story is never the same on the inside as it is on the outside. It's always so different than what you read in the news, what's happening inside. Number two is, I think us founders are constantly dreaming of starting other companies every day. I think you have this myth that, you're just focused on this one thing, right? Elon Musk is just focused on this, and Steve Jobs was only focused on that. But in reality, I think it's natural that have 100 ideas every day, and it's hard to not pursue them and only focus on one. And occasionally we do have to feed that urge to pursue them. And lastly, it's more controversial, but I think what we see is almost everyone ends up in conflict with their investors given enough time. And no one ever expects that, right? You expect it to be some financial transaction, like you go to the market, they, give them some money, they give you some apples. But with investors, it's quite different. It's much more like a marriage or a long relationship where eventually you will have fights. Some of them might be existential and deadly. Some might be just little scuffles, but there will be blood.
But talking about how you develop these businesses, the first one, you had no experience in entrepreneurship. The second one, it was after 7 years of developing a company. But you started it in North Carolina, then moved to New York. Did this help because you weren't in Silicon Valley where the conversation was, even if it moved for some startups, New York is the market, maybe now it's building in Texas. Was it an advantage to start from North Carolina, then going to New York?
Absolutely. I think
maybe not having the noise around you.
Yeah, it's easy to get sucked into the hype, right? The East Coast versus the West Coast of the US tends to be much more grounded in unit economics and profit in real businesses, where West Coast tends to be kind of more dreamy startups with high valuations and potential, but maybe not a clear view to profit. That's a thing people say. So yeah, I think, look, it's funny how people appreciate you always when you leave. So for example, in I think maybe in North Carolina, when I was building the startup, people were like, okay, he's just another guy trying to build a startup. But then when we got to New York, even though the company hadn't changed, it was the exact same thing, right? Like literally nothing has changed. Now all of a sudden, all the people in North Carolina, I go, wait a second, like they must be doing well because they're in New York now, so they look up to the people in New York and as a sign. So in a way that helped get more investors from North Carolina. Yeah, I think I was always bad at kind of telling my own story and investors want that story. And I think that's good, because if you get so good at telling your story that it's better, that hides kind of issues in the business, that's not a good place to be. I'd rather have a great business and be bad at telling the story, and eventually the right folks will find it and it will be better because I won't be overhyped. And I've seen many founders get overhyped, raise millions of dollars on a story that really didn't work. And so then you're in a really tough place trying to execute on that with the outside pressure, with the hype. It's really hard on your psyche. So it's not a place I would want to be in.
Yeah. And if you were to move back to Europe and start a startup from Europe, what would you do?
Well, I think it would be like a new country. So I think about this all the time. Like, how would technology change a country if it was designed that way from the start, right? Like all the voting would be electronic, full transparency and accountability of tax dollars, with invested education and health care rather than military and bureaucracy. So I don't think we need to do it on the moon, but rather somewhere on Earth where maybe we can try reinventing the way countries are done. As for industry, I wouldn't say I'm close enough to the European market to know the issues, the details, right?
Yeah. I'd
rather start a nonprofit these days. I think of innovative ways to give back. Like, what if, for example, a nonprofit was building open source software? So rather than all these SaaS software licenses we all pay, you have a company that gives away for free or for a small donation. I think with AI, the cost of building that SaaS is going to go way down. So we could offer a free alternative to almost every SaaS product out there. And I think that would disrupt a lot of companies. So that's just one crazy idea.
Flaviu, thank you very much for this conversation. It was fascinating. And again, good luck in building further Troy, and to know more about what you're doing there.
Thank you for having me, Vlad. Talk soon.
Thank you, and thank you all for watching this video or listening in audio as a podcast. You can read more on startup.ro. My name is Vlad Andreescu, and have a great day.